Welcome to Cinemaholics. You're listening to our review of Locked Down, which is an excerpt from our full episode 203. This episode is hosted by Will Ashton, Abby Olchesi, and myself, John Negroni. To watch and listen to Cinemaholics live every week, follow us on YouTube. The link is in the description of this review. Enjoy the show. Now, in our One Night in Miami review, Will Ashton, you mentioned, it's hard to top that ensemble, but can Anne Hathaway and Chiwetel Ejiofor do it? With Stephen Merchant, Mindy Kaling, Lucy Boynton, Ben Stiller, Ben Kingsley, and a few others I probably can't even remember.
Yeah, I mean, that's a film where we're trapped in one room with a bunch of people we want to spend time with. Whereas Lockdown is a movie where we're trapped in a room with a bunch of people we don't want to spend time with.
Not to the actors themselves. We're not
No. I'm only
making sure. Yeah. This is a new COVID movie. It was filmed during COVID. It's kind of about COVID, as Will has mentioned. It's a romantic comedy heist film directed by Doug Liman. So this is kind of like the first major coronavirus movie, directed by a pretty well-known director, somebody that definitely brings people out to see his films. Edge of Tomorrow, American Made, the last couple films he's done, I think we've noticed. But this one was written by Stephen Knight as well, which definitely gives a little bit of curiosity, I think, for a lot of people who are a fan of his work as a screenwriter. So, as I mentioned, Anne Hathaway, Chiwetel Ejiofor, we have a romantic comedy with them that kind of turns into a heist movie. What's this one all about, Will Ashton?
Yeah, so like you're saying before, we're following, I think this was around March or April of the pandemic. Basically, London is on lockdown at this point.
I think it's probably May. It feels like they've been doing this for a while. Maybe it is April. It's not quite the summer for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the movie makes a point to establish that time just is fleeting at this point. It doesn't it's hard to know which I guess is fitting, but it does make it hard to pin down exactly when this is supposed to be. But basically, we're following two fairly affluent couples who are if not separating, on the verge of separating at this point, before the pandemic caused them to be bunkered in their very lavish home that they tend to undersell for whatever weird reason throughout the film.
We're locked down in this huge, spacious, fully amenitied, work from home jobs. Right. I'm getting paid to not have to work. Yeah, that's so very relatable.
Yeah, it's 3 floors, and they could just I feel like there wouldn't be a movie if they just each had a floor to themselves. If they just but oh well. In any case, Anne Hathaway is a high profile I don't exactly know what business they're doing, but she's if not a CEO, if she's not a CEO, she's close to it. And then
she's a CEO. Of a fashion thing.
Right, something like that. And then Chiwetel Ejiofor is a formerly convicted criminal who's trying to get his life back in order. And obviously, his record is preventing him from really flourishing. But he does find this new job where he's basically a driver. And basically, that forms, I don't know if this is a spoiler to say, but a heist plan that follows through later in the film than I anticipated. Because I was told early on, or at least from the previews and stuff, that the heist was the general plot of the film. But it's for the most part kind of a Nancy Meyers pache that just eventually becomes a half-ass heist movie in the last 45 minutes, which is from a plotting standpoint very bizarre, and certainly not the least of the movie's problems.
Yeah, it's weird because literally you have Anne Hathaway from The Intern from part of this movie, then you have Anne Hathaway from Ocean's 8 for the last part of this movie, right? And it doesn't quite, it's weird. I forgot to mention, I don't know if we said this is on HBO Max, so it's pretty easy to see this one. And the first review I saw for this was very positive, so I was and a lot of people have been talking about this. And then, so Abby Olchesi was okay, guys, what are we watching this week? And I was I feel like Lockdown is pretty, it's a can't miss. We gotta, good or bad. And so Abby was okay. And I was totally up to you, Abby. You don't have to watch Lockdown. And she was just I'm being forced to watch this film by John and Will. But Abiel, Jesse.
I apologize.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I got so aggressive with you guys, but I really
No.
hate this.
Being facetious. But yeah, so tell us how much you liked Lockdown, Abby. The movie, not the event that happened.
Yeah, I'm trying to like parse this through in ways that doesn't just make it sound like a horrible takedown. I feel like maybe this isn't strictly true because I was just talking about how much I want to watch Host, which is set entirely on Zoom. Like I think that there are ways to creatively address the kind of communication issues and communication requirements that so many of us are living with right now. But in terms of, I don't know, reaction to pandemic living, I almost feel like it's going to take a little more processing for us to get actual great art out of this, instead of what we're getting, at least on a major film level. And this really, to me, smacks of something that was thrown together very quickly with very little thought. The Zoom conversations focus so much on like the audio ticks and things that go wrong when like that happens to me on Zoom, maybe, I don't know, about half the time, I guess. Like definitely not every single time, to the point that this movie seems to be following, which makes it very annoying to listen to most of those conversations. A lot of those conversations feel like memorized monologues. And it also kind of gives off a vibe of kind of bored celebrities who are trying really hard to be edgy and seem to have found an opportunity that allows them to do so.
Remember that Imagine video?
Yeah,
this is
right.
like the more not emo cousin of that video, but like the frustrated rich cousin.
Yeah, like that. There's a moment when Anne Hathaway kind of rage dances to Adam Ant in the garden of her really nice house, and it's just I don't know. It feels so forced to me. Like it just doesn't. And there are so many other things that are alluded to about these characters and their shared experience together that really don't make sense with how those characters are played. Like we talk about Chiwetel Ejiofor's character Paxton, his background as like a biker and his kind of criminal infraction thing.
Yeah,
that
also a heroin addict. Also, it's like Mad Libs with his character.
All of these things, all of these things. And I mean, we've seen characters with difficult pasts being portrayed compassionately on screen, like, for example, Sound of Metal, which we were talking about earlier. And Chiwetel Ejiofor gives off absolutely no vibe of that. He feels like a well-heeled drama school grad in the way that he performs this and the way that he performs these definitely memorized monologues.
He definitely strikes as somebody who did LSD once and then tries to make it sound like he had like an addiction, like in
Absolutely.
college.
And like there are some funny bits that come in, like that one time that they were pagans for a bit and the goat was his totem. Like I find that funny. I definitely don't see that applying to him. It doesn't really seem authentic to the character. Linda, Anne Hathaway's character, some of the things we learned about her doesn't seem authentic to the way that Anne Hathaway is playing her. Which she looks as like somebody who has had a successful career and money all of her life, instead of having like wild days and one time when she went to Sturgis. Like neither of these people have ever been to Sturgis. It's clear. And yeah, there's so much about it that rings false to me. The called in cameos feel like just kind of quickie bits from like people calling in favors, which I guess is fine. It seems unnecessary.
It was more entertaining than anything else, I think, in this movie. For me.
Sort of.
Like, oh, like, yeah, cool.
Yeah, like somebody pops up and like, oh, Claes Bang, I like him. I'd much rather watch something else that he's in for a longer period of time.
It's like when you have a conversation with someone you want to end and somebody else shows up and you're kind of like, oh, thank goodness.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I forgot how much I like The Square. I'm going to go watch that. So anyway, those are all the things that I don't know. And in addition to the fact that I find Paxton and Linda to be extremely unlikable people, once we get to the heist portion of this, it's a little better, I guess, in that like we've changed setting. So there's some stuff changing. There are a couple of like third act occurrences that don't need to be there. I feel like they're there just to kind of complicate things a little bit unnecessarily. And I don't know. I think it ends far too neatly. It feels like kind of a whim that got financed somehow and made into a movie. And we were told that it could potentially be timely. And there was nothing about it that rang true for me. So those are, I think, literally all my thoughts on that movie.
I think, yeah, what you're saying is true. I think they rushed it. They were like, we have to put this out before it becomes like too late. Because I think at this point, like the mood of that period of lockdown is very different from the mood of like the lockdown right now. Because right now, most people don't seem to be locked down really anymore. Like there's a lot of people who are staying home and everything, but like things have changed. Like I think right now we're dealing with like the virus is like running rampant across the UK and the United States, and people have just like given up on locking down. So like I get the sense that they're like, well, we got to release this movie because
The
like
script has flipped.
yeah, there you go. I have two main things with this movie, and then we can move it to you, Will. But I think my main thing with this movie is like I don't think it's terrible or anything. Like it's it's I think it's more embarrassing than anything else. Like I think it's just so revealing of like the two pandemics that people went through, of like the pandemic that rich people faced and celebrities and Hollywood actors faced is so ridiculously different from like what everybody else faced, and they just don't seem to be aware of it. There is no self-awareness of like these people's problems and how like their inconveniences during the pandemic were exponentially more challenging for us, for like people, and we're pretty privileged compared to a lot of people who've had it way worse than I have. And so like I can't help watching this movie just be like, yeah, like you said, it's like a whim of like they just came out with a script. Like this is the kind of script that like they would have revised it and like, okay, just get rid of the heist thing, or start the movie when there's 45 minutes left and start it there and like just fix the setup so that it's not, all these things can be ironed out. And also let's like rework the script so that it's not so tone deaf. But none of that happened because I think they wanted to rush this thing out because they wanted to make a just gimmicky COVID movie that, has like the, it just has the humanity of like a wrung out sponge. So yeah, I think this movie is, it's not technically terrible. Like there's scenes and there's dialogue and it's not great or anything. It's all just pretty average. But I think what pushes this thing to below average for me is that its subject matter couldn't be more uninteresting, especially at this point in time. But yeah, Will, are you the lone defender of this movie?
Unfortunately not. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to be a little nice this film because I understand that they had enormous challenges, not only with the production of it, but just like you were saying, like getting a movie made and finished and released about COVID in a timely manner. But there's also something that just feels very cynical about making a movie about the COVID experience, because like when are you going to release this? Like it's a terrible time to release it now, but you can't release it later because like it'll be even more outdated at that point. So it's like, who's this movie even for at this point? Like, is it for, like you said, like the like affluent people who have been stuck at home and just like aren't used to having to spend time with their significant other that they don't love anymore? Or is it like what? But at the end of the day, I think it's just a rush script that just doesn't really know what it wants to do, because like I think if they wanted to make a like dark comedy slash romantic, maybe anti-romantic comedy about being stuck with a person that you no longer love in your apartment, like that's a fine idea for a movie. Like I think you'd have to have someone like Noah Baumbach do it. I don't think Doug Liman is a particularly well-versed comedy director just based on his past experience. But if you wanted to do something like that, fine. Like I know Chiwetel Ejiofor and Anne Hathaway are very dependable actors. I mean, I know Anne Hathaway is like doing capital A acting in this, but I think it's a little bit more endearing than what she did in The Witches personally. But yeah, I think for me, like, I guess where I'm going to push back is that like I could not stand any of the Skype scenes. Like the Skype scenes were some of the worst. Yeah,
I think like it rang of like, oh, the worst thing these people have to deal with is bad connection.
It's just like I like Abby was saying, like, oh, it felt false. Like, oh, you're in Italy. I heard it's really bad over there. Like, yeah, we're doing this. It's like yeah, it just feels like so telegraphed and like pandering at this point that like you're saying, John, it's just like I just found it to be so out of touch with reality and like what people are actually dealing with and talking about in these discussions. And also just like there's nothing cinematically or visually interesting about watching Skype conversations. Like I thought Host was fine. Like I think that movie did a little bit better stylistically, also because it's a lot shorter than this film. But I just just don't really care about watching Skype calls. I'd rather movies, if they're gonna continue making movies like this in the future, just please don't do that. Because I was I was personally more into the film when it was just like two characters talking about their problems, which I do think like I am not a fan of Anne Hathaway's character, but I think she did it. Her performance was fine. I actually do think Chiwetel Ejiofor did a pretty good job, especially considering that apparently the film was shot in I think like 11 days or maybe like 18 days, and they were so rushed in production that they had to like basically pull Marlon Brando and like tape lines around the set so they could know what their lines were. Which I mean, I didn't really get that feel throughout, so I guess that's credit to them as actors that they could move past that shortcoming. But yeah, at the end of the day, I found it to be pretty intolerable because like we're saying, like if it's going to just be a like anti rom-com about people in pandemic, that's fine. If you're going to make like a lazy heist movie, like it breaks the main rule of heist movies, which is that they tell you what the heist is, and then like when you do that in a film, it's like, oh, okay, so surely it's not going to go that way because there's no driving conflict if everything just goes exactly as you said. But yet that's pretty much exactly what happens in this film. So it's like, then what's the point? Like if you were just going to tell us what's going to happen, why? I don't know. It just feels very much like you're saying like a first draft of a screenplay that they just rushed into production because they wanted to get this film made as quickly as possible. And in that respect, it does feel fairly artless and cynical. Like I was saying, like it just doesn't, it feels like a movie that's capitalizing on this point in time and not really commenting on it in anything that's actually involving the conversation or actually bring, perspective to something that we've all been lived through and have a shared experience with. And in that respect, I didn't really find too much to enjoy with this film.
All right. It sounds like you're ready to say your final grade. I'm a C minus. I think it was basically a C movie, but it's so out of touch that I bump it down to C minus. But what about you?
I'm a C minus, verging on a D plus. Like I said, I think because I enjoyed the two performances, like I didn't really like the characters all that much, but I think the performances are good, and I do think there's enough like kind of back and forth there that I was able to look over a lot of the film's shortcomings. But at the end of the day, like I don't want to revisit this film. I didn't really get a lot out of the experience of watching it, and pretty much by the end, it's fairly intolerable. And also, the movie's mask kit is just awful. Like it's a minor thing in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
But, like, no one in this movie knows how to wear a mask, and it's like.
Well, I think it's because it was probably like you were saying, they were filming it so early in COVID. We didn't really have a lot of the mask stuff figured out, if I recall, around that time.
Maybe. I don't know. But in any case, that's just something that stood out to me watching it. So yeah, I'd give it a low C minus.
All right, Abby, what about you?
I think I'm D plus territory on this. It's really low. I kind of agree with what all of you have said. It feels really out of touch in terms of like what people were actually dealing with going through pandemic stuff. I think it's underthought, underdeveloped, underwritten. And it's another thing that, I mean, I don't know that this necessarily had any hope, but like Stephen Knight, who wrote the script, like wrote and directed Locke, which takes place within a single car. So like he can do a closed set film.
Absolutely.
Like that's not outside the realm of possibility. In fact, it is probably one of the only unequivocally great things that he is credited as having done when you look at his filmography, which is kind of shaky. But it's and Liman is like he's I think kind of starting to get more better regular recognition now as somebody who's really good with action. So perhaps the issue here is, I don't know, injecting the romantic comedy status. Like I think there's a possibility to do something really interesting here, but it just feels like every step along the way was the wrong step to take.
Agreed.
So I think there's potential in that premise. I think we could definitely see some interesting stuff come out of the pandemic when it's given, like when the idea is given some room to breathe and some thought. But I think in the race to be like new and sharp and timely, I think all of that just kind of fell flat on its face.
Yeah, I mean, to quote Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, they're so caught up in whether or not they could make a movie about COVID that they didn't figure out whether or not they should. So.
There it is. Yeah,
exactly. This movie, it's only 8 minutes longer than One Night in Miami. To me, it felt 80 minutes longer.
Oh, yes.
I kept pausing and being like, this has got to be wrapping up. And it would be like, no, John, you're not even halfway done. You still have over an hour left. That kept happening throughout this movie. I'm sorry, Abby, that, Will and I forced you under contract to watch this movie.
How dare
pressured
you?
Your hand into it. I think, though, hey, maybe a silver lining is, I know for me, I have been telling people, because people were telling me they wanted to see this, and I have been telling them, do not. You will most likely not like it, and you'll most likely find it really, like, just galling. Particularly, there's a suicide joke in this that really pissed me off. I was like furious at like how light they made of that, considering like what people have been going through. Like that's a real thing. Huh?
I forgot about that.
I genuinely at that point considered turning it off. Like I would have if like I hadn't already. I would have felt guilty if like Abby had been like, John forced me to watch this, you know, under threat of like against my cats, and then he ended up not watching it himself. No, I would never threaten your cats, Abby. They're important.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, well that's Lockdown. A conversation I think that ended up being as weird as the movie itself, perhaps. But
I will say,
yeah.
I don't want to hear anyone complain about the fight scenes in Marriage Story ever again after watching this movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
good point.
if I hear anyone complain about this, I'm saying watch Lockdown and come back to me. That's what I said.
Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice. Mine is Overcast. Or find us on YouTube, where you can stream our weekly episodes live for even more banter and weird film takes. See you all next time.